Omar, so these announcements, it's just putting lipstick on a pig?
Exactly. I think it's just cosmetic changes and not much is going to change on the ground. Eric, what are you doing?
Oh, I'm lacing up my running shoes because guess what's coming up? The Iraqi Children's Foundation 5K. It's coming up on August 29th, Saturday, out at Burke Lake in Fairfax, Virginia. And by the way, you can be anywhere, whether you're tuning in from Europe or Iraq or the UK or Kurdistan, wherever you are, you can sign up at IraqiChildren.org. You can learn all about the 5K. We'd love for you to, of course, join Epic's team, but you don't have to. You can also just run on your own or join other teams. So hope that we see you there or that you're able to join us virtually. All right, so let's get into today's episode. Are you ready? So today we're talking about militias and disarmament in Iraq. This week, three major militias announced plans to place their weapons under state control, prompting Prime Minister Ali al Zaidi to call the move a positive step toward building the state and strengthening the rule of law. The announcements were also welcomed by the U.S. Special Envoy Tom Barrack, who described them as a significant step forward and praised groups willing to return their weapons to the Iraqi state. But what exactly do these announcements mean? Are Iraq's militias really preparing to give up power? Or is this just a political rebranding effort? To help us unpack these developments, I'm joined by my colleague Omar Al-Nidawi. And you just published a piece for the Stimson Center. Very cool.
Yes,
An
sir.
analysis
hmm
on this very topic. Yes. So we'll include a link up there or over there or somewhere. Okay. All right. So Omar, the Trump administration has, I mean, it's been a cornerstone of the Trump administration's Iraq policy for a long time, has been curbing these militias. Why has this become so urgent now?
Yeah, the problem of disarming militias and the PMF going out of control has been on the agenda for a long time. It's not new, but I think the urgency increased with the Iran war because that exposed more of how these groups have hijacked war and peace decisions in Iraq. And we saw that Iraq became a second front in this war. It was the only country that was attacked by the US, by Israel, by Iran. And while the militias were also striking targets inside Iraq. So they joined the fight from day one. The U.S. was striking them from day one, and they were striking at the U.S. interests and at also Iraq's neighbors, Gulf states, from day one. And some of those attacks have actually continued even after the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, and they have really put new strains on Iraq's relations with its neighbors and really have caused a headache for everyone. So, in recent weeks, we've seen the U.S., we've seen Washington put more and more pressure on these groups and on Baghdad to also rein them in. There have been new sanctions. Rewards for justice announcements, and pretty much a red line that these groups should not be part of government and they should be excluded from government institutions and that they should be disarmed.
Yeah, and folks, unless you didn't notice, there is still a war going on. We're hitting day 100, I believe, today or
You mean
tomorrow.
a conflict?
Yes, a conflict. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah. An excursion.
Yes, yes, yes. We'll call it that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still ongoing, devastating impact. We'll be talking more about that in our next episode. But by the way, folks, because this is so important, there's so many developments happening in Iraq every day. Check out Isham at enablingpeace.org. All right. So as we mentioned right in our opening, three militia groups announced what sounds like plans to give up their arms, and Washington's new envoy in Iraq welcomed this as progress. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, it began last week with Muqtada Sadr announcing that he's going to place his Saraya Salam militia under the control of the commander-in-chief. And then Asab al-Haq of Qais al-Khazali followed suit, saying that they're going to detach their militia from the PMF and put it under the direct control of the prime minister. Katab al-Imam Ali of Shibli Zaidi also followed suit. And this came alongside announcements by the leaders of the coordination framework, also talking about disarmament and the exclusive right of the people of Iraq through their constitutional institutions to control decisions of war and peace. Immediately noticeable were contradictions and inconsistencies in the language used by different actors here. So while the Sab al-Haq and Kital al-Ma'ali were talking about detaching their militias from the PMF and putting them under the Prime Minister's control, the coordination framework was talking about detaching the PMF from political organizations and political parties. So it seems like everyone is trying to talk about solving Washington's problem, but using very different and inconsistent language about it.
Omar, are you saying that they've been lying to us this whole time?
Yes. I mean, everyone
Okay.
who's told you for the last 10 years that the PMF is under the direct control of the prime minister apparently has been lying. Shocker.
Well, this just in, it's called the Constitution of Iraq, and let's
Hmm.
see here, just a moment here. So Article 9, Section 1, Clause B of the Iraqi Constitution. Oh, it strictly prohibits the formation of military militias outside the framework of the Iraqi armed forces.
Yeah. But
What's
see,
going
they
on?
have been within the framework of Iraq's armed forces, except they weren't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, now that's you understand now? It makes no
Politics.
sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, this is exciting. Militias are disarming. They're giving up their weapons. They're joining the state. I mean, like kumbaya, right? Kumbaya. But what about the other militias, like I don't know, Kataib Hezbollah and some of these hardliners that have been a problem?
Yeah, so that's the interesting part is that the ones that have actually been the headache, the pain in everyone's side, uh, remain vehemently opposed to the idea of disarmament. They have even issued statements. I mean, the way I read it is that they were shaming the groups that were willing to compromise and saying, "Oh, don't give your weapons to the states. We'll buy them from you, and we'll take care of your veterans that you're going to lay off," which I think is quite a thinly hidden jab at these groups.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, for the veterans that are tuned in, you get the signal. Yeah, yeah. We got it.
Hmm.
So everyone talks about disarming militias, but it seems that nobody is defining what that means. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely no single vision towards the issue. I think there's agreement that's an anomaly, the presence of these militias and factions. But on the one hand, you have groups like Asab al-Haq, Qais al-Khazali's group, which claims that there was a time for resistance, for armed resistance, and that was when the US occupation existed, and this is over, and we need to move forward and start building a state outside this framework of armed resistance and put everything under state control and move on. So these are actors who actually have embedded themselves deeply into the state, and they are the government, so they don't care about changing banners. You have more hardliners who are less embedded politically, less empowered politically, but are quite powerful in terms of coercive force, who are more attached, I think, to Iran's military establishment. And these argue that no, the resistance project continues so long as the occupation of the U.S. occupation continues. In their view, that still has not been resolved. So these are kind of like the two competing visions. And you have also Muqtada al-Sadr, who has made an initiative to disarm and normalize his group. He's been, he's declared himself to be out of politics, but I think he's also trying to find a way back to capitalize on the pressure that is being place on his rivals. Let's not forget that the coordination framework in general, as a whole, they stole the government from Muqtada al-Sadr after the elections of 2021. And there were military clashes, there were armed clashes between coordination framework militias and the Sadrists, and the Sadrists were beaten. So I think Sadr is trying to capitalize on that pressure because disarmament favors the weak, and he has better political organization. We talked about that, I think, recently. So these are kind of like the different visions for disarmament based on really how these groups view U.S. presence and how they view themselves and their role within government and how much they can benefit from that.
Yeah, and their political ground game, right? I mean, Muqtada Sadr and the Sadrist movement, big political ground game. They won a lot of seats, as you mentioned, but then they weren't able to form a government, and they left the building disgruntled,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then Saib al-Haq is one of the militias, part of this the coordination framework. I mean, how many seats in the parliament? There's like what 329 seats or so. How many of those seats belong to these militia groups and the framework?
All in all, about 80 belong to the militia groups within the coordination framework. I'm not counting Dawlat al-Qanun, state of law of Nur al-Maliki. Asab al-Haq alone controls 27 or 28. So that's almost 10% of parliament. So they have quite a lot of political weight. And you can think of Qais al-Khazali is arguably the most powerful man in Iraq, the person who actually pulls a lot of the strings and who has boasted about having the prime minister as just an appointed general manager carrying out his will and that of the coordination framework oligarchs. So the prime minister serves at the pleasure of the coordination framework leaders, and Qais Khazai right now seems to be kind of like a first among equals, more or less.
Yeah, so good time to read. I don't need my militia anymore. I'm in power.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, so how would these visions shape possible approaches to disarmament? What are some of the options that could be pursued?
Again, disarmament is a widely used slogan and by everyone, but everyone who says it sometimes means something different entirely by that term. But I think we can like look at three let's say points on this spectrum and just for illustration. So one view would be to okay, let's look at the problem. The main problem is that heavy weapons that exist outside of state control. So this would be something I call it disarmament light, where everyone gives up their heavy weapons that are not official kit. They keep their fighters, they keep their structure, but they operate under state authority within the PMF, within the Popular Mobilization Forces. So it's just like putting the PMF truly under state control, no shenanigans outside of that. That might not be enough for the US because the US wants them defunded, excluded, and weakened, and also it's not going to fly with the hardliners as we mentioned, who have continued to say no, we're not giving up our heavy weapons. There's something probably closer to what Washington would want, which would be a targeted disarmament with a focus on those resistance factions, so to speak, the Katab Hezbollah, Katab Sayyid al-Shuhada, and Harakat al-Nujaba, to disarm them and exclude them from the PMF, but preserve the parts of the PMF that have been less problematic. There are, units within the PMF that have been serving public interest, serving Iraq's defense and security, the shrine units that are related to minority communities, maybe with a few exceptions. Those are not problematic, but there's also problems. There are also problems with this approach because what does it do about Asab al-Haq? Again, a highly problematic group that has used force and illegal means to accumulate power and influence. What happens to them? What happens to accountability? So that's also not feasible. It also singles out the resistance factions who are the most violent and could trigger intra-factional violence as the Al-Saib wants to enforce that against the against the Kataib. And there's, of course, on the extreme end of it would be the complete dissolution of the PMF, but that would be political suicide. You might as well ask the coordination framework leaders and the militia leaders to come together and just execute them each other. That's not going to happen under current circumstances. It's just out of the scope. So these are kind of like the extremes or some of the points on the spectrum. And again, there are problems with implementation and limitations on each one of them.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that. So, I mean, even if there's a plan on paper, and there's not yet, clearly, what are the main challenges facing an implementation of this effort to disarm the militias?
Well, I think the primary or the biggest problem here is enforcement. Who is going to enforce disarmament on a group that resists it, that refuses to disarm? Are we going to see the prime minister order the counterterrorism service to go disarm Hezbollah? We've seen Kataib Hezbollah try to assassinate a former prime minister for far less ambitious goals. So that's going to be extremely dangerous. There are no capable forces, and there's no political will to engage in hard enforcement of demilitarization or disarmament of the militias. Another big problem, I think, is obfuscation. It's everywhere. There are front groups, there are factions that can rebrand or reorganize while preserving influence. You have names like Ashab al-Kahf or Usbat al-Tha'irin. It's not even clear who these groups belong to, and sometimes the militias or actors within the PMF said like, oh, it's these groups, these are the outliers, these need to be disarmed, but they are ghosts in shadows. So that's also a problem in terms of enforcement and holding actors accountable. And there's really also a problem that even removing heavy weapons doesn't necessarily mean that the job is done. Because, yes, you can remove missiles and drones, and those militias can no longer strike in Jordan or Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, but you don't need missiles and drones to engage in coercion, in corruption, political intimidation, political violence, or even, kidnapping, coercion, all those sorts of violence, of violent policies that they can exercise inside Iraq against not just and Iraqis and Iraqi interests, but also against foreign interests. Those do not require heavy weapons, drones, and cruise missiles. So that is a big problem. Of course, we cannot forget the elephant in the room, which is Iran and its influence. And Iran sees Iraqi militias as a strategic asset. Their value has increased, I think, in terms of assisting Iran's power projection goals, especially with the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the demise of the Assad regime in Syria. So, all in all, I think these are the primary factors that are going to be to make disarmament quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for American viewers and fans of mafia films, I think that's the analogy to understand. Until you get guns out of politics, you have mafias running around. You start a business, you start making money. Suddenly, somebody comes by and people whisper, "Oh, that guy's with this militia," and then you have to cooperate, and there's extortion. I mean, that's the kind of challenge that will be ongoing as a social problem until this issue is fully resolved.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens? What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, it seems like most people in government, in the security forces, and in the militias that have initiated these plans are pretending that everything is great. They're setting up joint committees to coordinate the process of doing an inventory of weapons and men and timelines for putting their units under the control and command of the prime minister. There is chatter that there's a deadline to wrap this up by September, which coincides uh, with the projected end of the mission for the global coalition's presence in Iraq against ISIS. So there's a bit of an urgency to get this process completed by then. But of course, keep in mind that because of all of the above, what we're seeing spearheaded by Asaba al-Haq, Kitab Imam Ali, and the Sadrs, will likely be simply cosmetic rebranding that may actually leave some groups like Asaba al-Haq with even more power, because by being attached directly to the prime minister, they're more untouchable than they are now. They gain extra legitimacy, and they will have the uh, approval of the U.S. for this move, unless, of course, people sober up and see what this means in reality, that these announcements actually are quite hollow.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a theme of from previous episodes. It's important to actually have a clear plan and not
Hmm.
just to be doing this stuff ad hoc. I mean, in some ways, it's great because it seems like the silver lining of all of this pressure and this conflict has been pressure to finally get to some progress on this disarmament issue. But there needs to be a plan. There needs to be a destination.
Absolutely.
All right, so some closing thoughts. One of the themes that keeps coming up in this conversation is that disarmament means very different things to different political leaders and parties. Many Iraqis, international partners, and even some militia leaders agree that the current situation is unsustainable. But agreement on the goal is not the same as agreement on the destination. The real debate now is not whether change should happen, but what success actually looks like, how it would be enforced, and what political compromises Iraq's leaders are willing to make along the way. Until these questions are answered, announcements about disarmament may generate headlines without fundamentally changing the balance of powers. So, Omar, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Eric.
And thanks everyone for watching. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into this topic, check out Omar's piece at the Stimson Center. Also, get those running shoes ready, and don't forget, we got the Iraqi Children Foundation 5K coming. This is the 10th. I have a dozen of these shirts. We've been doing it every year at Epic. So
Yeah.
please check it out. Sign up whether you run for on your own, join a team, or join Epic's team. Those that are following and watching this episode, join our team. That would be great. IraqiChildren.org. You can also follow Epic's on weekly analysis at enablingpeace.org. Sign up for our weekly issue. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
مع السلامة.
Maslama.